Hi guys, I want to share with you today about our first social studies character. In social studies this year, we're going to be learning about different people who impacted freedom in our country. And we're going to be learning the different ways that they played a part in our freedoms that we have today. So I want you to be listening as I talk through this video to see how this gentleman on the screen before you plays a part in the freedom of America. I want you to write it down on a piece of paper and bring it with you to class tomorrow, because we're going to be talking about how he changed your life that you know today. Remember, in history, we've already talked about ancient Greece and how those the government that they set up in ancient Greece helped us to establish our government, and we've taken a lot of pieces from their government to use in our world. Also, we've talked about how the Pilgrims wanted to escape the tyrannical rule in Great Britain, and they wanted to come to a place where they could determine their own government, make their own choices, and to worship the way they wanted to worship. So they came to land on Plymouth Rock in the late 1600s. And now we're going to skip ahead almost 100 years, and we're going to study the life of this gentleman. The gentleman on the screen before you is Paul Revere. And in his hand, he is holding a silver item because he was a silversmith and a copper engraver just like his father. And so he made over 5,000 items in silver. And so today, Revere silver is actually a very high commodity, and it's all from Paul Revere. So let me tell you a little bit about him. He was born in January of 1735. His father was from France and was a silversmith, like Paul learned to be. Paul was married twice, and he had a total of 8 children. He had 51 grandchildren. And I learned today that he was actually a cousin of Abraham Lincoln. And that's fascinating because I know a lot of you know about Abraham Lincoln, and so you're interested in that. Paul Revere was a political activist. That means he became very involved in government. He also was a part of the Massachusetts Communication Committee, and so he would take their letters, because they didn't have internet or telegrams or telephones or any of that kind of communication, or cars. Back then, they didn't have radio. And so Paul Revere and others, many others like him, would use their horses, and they would transport the letters that were written with pen and ink, and they would take them to the different places they needed to be to help the communication to travel. There was no post office. They actually established the first post office. And so he was a very big part of that. He also was a big part of the Sons of Liberty, and we're going to be talking more about them. They were very involved in the Boston Massacre in 1770. We're going to talk about how that affected Great Britain and how it was designed to send Great Britain a lesson, because at this time in America, like I said, there were 13 colonies, and they were still under British rule. And so far in the last 100 years, that hadn't been a problem. But we got a new king, King George, in Great Britain, and he was slightly mad, and he was very power hungry. And so he wanted control of the money that was coming from the colonies, and he also wanted to be able to tell them how to worship and to control their government. And so he began to send soldiers over in this time period just to establish a little bit more control. But it kind of escalated in 1770. And so we're going to see the Boston Tea Party, it happened in 1773. And we're going to see how Paul Revere played a part in that. We're also going to see that in 1774, he became a part of the Massachusetts Committee Correspondence. And then Paul Revere played a really, really important part. And we're going to travel with him and watch him as he does his most famous act in history that he's known for. And it happened on April 18th, 1775. Paul Revere was established as a lookout because Great Britain was sending more soldiers to take over the American colonies. And the colonies had been forewarned by soldiers who were called loyalists, who were in the colonies, but they weren't really working for Great Britain anymore. And so they warned Paul Revere and a lot of the different colonists. And so they formed their own military. And they were ready to fight the British soldiers that were coming over, but they didn't know when or where they would come. And so Paul Revere and some of his friends got together, and they were lookouts on April the 18th. And Paul Revere saw the signal that is now famous, and we're going to find out what 1 if by land or 2 if by sea means. And we're going to ride with him as we see him to spread the word about the redcoats coming. And we're going to helped to warn the colonists to be aware of what was going on so that they could get their military ready for when the British soldiers attacked. And then we're going to see how Paul Revere finishes out his life. But Paul Revere was very famous for this ride and for warning and helping save the colonists and preparing them to fight the Redcoats. And so we're going to, like I said, travel with him on his ride and hear about the adventures that he had and see how he helped change our world today. So pay attention in class and make sure that you bring your piece of paper that tells me, excuse me, oh, dang it. Crap. So I had to go